Melinda, your work is very accessible and it's drawn praise from the likes of Les Murray and Jeff Page, who's described your work as dealing directly with life as it is, which I think is a really good description, and it certainly describes your piece No Bed, that's in The Invisible Thread, and there's also a great deal of humour in your work, which I love. This might be a rather cheeky question, but tell me about the poem and where it came from.
When I read this poem, I think last time I read it, The Gods, which was in July, it was in April this year. When I read this poem out, I prefaced it with a little spiel that many people found very amusing, and what I said then was, a guy called Fitzgerald wrote a book about Canberra called Fitzgerald's Canberra, and he said that the two main sports in Canberra were gardening and adultery. And then I said, I'm going to read a poem now. Can you guess which one this poem's about? And I read No Bed. So I suppose, the whole subject matter of the poem is love on the wrong side of the sheets. But I would like the record to reflect I haven't personally experienced every setting in the poem, and and none of them were while my current relationship is actually on foot. So all of it's a long time ago. And a fair bit of it is sourced from listening to people talk too much when they're drunk and thinking, oh, that's interesting, I'll file that away and perhaps change the sexes or the time period, and, like all writers do.
Yeah, eavesdropping something writers do very well.
So, and I suppose I can't even remember where it came from. I was playing around with the sonnet form and I wanted to write a sonnet, and I thought, what's something I've never seen in a sonnet before? Something that, a kind of another angle on a love sonnet. And so I just played around with that idea and saw how many different settings I could get into the poem. Anyway, it was a lot of fun to write.
It's a lot of fun to read as well. Now, you've said that it's your belief that if a poem can't speak to a person of ordinary intelligence without the help of a literature academic, the poet isn't doing a proper job. Now, that statement's obviously made in reference to particular kinds of poetry. Can you talk about that a little bit?
I've had that statement up on my blog for quite a while now and on my resume, and I knew it was going to come back to bite me one day. I suppose I find it quite... I'm interested in contemporary poetry, both Australian and international, but I kind of resent the sinking feeling I get when I pick up a book of poems, because my initial reaction is there anything in here that I'm going to be able to enjoy reading? And I think joy is something that's an important part of the reading experience, and it's something I try and put into my work. And I'm generalising a lot here, my experience with a lot of poems that come out of a highly academised space, a highly literate, well-educated, well-read and interested in gaining a PhD kind of space. The poems that come out of there are very clever and very elusive and very rewarding if you're ready to spend the time with them. But at the end you don't necessarily end up with a lot of joy. So I haven't got an English PhD, and I haven't studied English at a tertiary level. I did Japanese and law. So I'm an outsider looking at that world and looking at the poetry that comes out of that world and thinking, well, that's lovely and that's fine, but I think I have something different to bring in my own voice. And so I stand up for poetry that ordinary people can just pick up and read. And of course I try and put lots of stuff in my poems that will be there for people who want to read them more than once. But I think that if you're going to build this little building out of words, you don't have to have the front door wide open, but at least leave a window open somewhere for the reader to get in and wander around. If you just have a great big blank wall and no way for them to start to access what the poem's about, then it's a little bit arrogant, I think. Anyway, I've said my piece on that now.
And you spoke about taking away joy from your poems. There's also a lot of humour in your poetry. What do you hope a reader experiences when they come to read your work?
I suppose when I write a poem, I imagine that I'm having a chat or showing something to a friend who is a bit like me but isn't me. So I try and get that same sense of companionship and generosity into what I write, and I hope that when people read my work they feel like someone has sat down and spent some companionable time with them and attempted to make their world a little bigger but in an enjoyable way.
There's a saying in Canberra that if you shake a tree, a poet will fall out of it. So what's it like being a part of that community?
It's very weird because, there's quite a lot of people here whose names are on all sorts of elevated shortlists for things and who've received all sorts of amazing lifetime achievement awards for their work. So it's quite a privilege, I suppose, because it's such a small community, and yet the people here who are doing it are very good at the poetry that they do and are well recognised for it. It's a chance to learn from and listen to lots of amazing poets. So, I love living in Canberra. I grew up in Orange, New South Wales, and there is a poetry scene in Orange, but it's a little bit harder to get them all in the one place, and I suppose not as many well-recognised poets have made Orange their home.
And tell us where you write. Do you have a dedicated space, and how you write, if you set aside particular time?
I have written almost everywhere, I think. I don't have a routine as such, although last year I was the recipient for the very first time of a grant which gave me 1 day a week to write. So that's probably the closest I've ever come to having a day that I spent writing and doing things in a particular order. But I've written in cafes, and I've written at desks, and I've written under trees, and I always have a notebook with me, and now I have a smartphone, so sometimes I can even type up the first draft after scribbling. But I always still scribble by hand. There's something about physically getting the words out of you onto the paper that I find isn't it doesn't work for me if I try to do it directly into some kind of word processing device. I need to actually do the first draft by hand, but that first draft can be anywhere. Buses are great. Public transport, when I worked full time, that half an hour in the morning, half an hour at night, 5 days a week, brilliant writing time.
And finally, tell me, if Canberra was a poem, what sort of poem do you think it would be?
That's a very good question. I can think of some things that would be in the poem, but I don't think... I think it would have a lot of... The form of the poem would have to be circular. So it would probably something, because there's so many circles and roundabouts and so on, probably something like a villanelle, or something that goes around to meet itself. And there would be... The enduring image of Canberra I have is actually those people who meet in the park on Sunday afternoon, who are all mid-level public servants, but they dress up in medieval armour and swords, and they're called the Society for Creative Anachronism, I think. Anyway, they teach each other swordplay. And I think that's Canberra to a T. People have these quite normal daily lives, but there's room after that dailiness is finished to go off and do something bizarre or extraordinary or creative or whatever. Anyway, I like that about this place, that everyone's got their side thing that they do.